The wedding was over. The celebration had ended. The guests were gone. But behind closed doors, the night turned into something no one could ever imagine. A groom discovers a secret about his new bride, a secret so shocking that within hours, blood would be spilled in the most intimate place of all, the wedding bed. This is the chilling case of a marriage that ended before it ever truly began. Welcome to Dark Motives, where we uncover the most shocking and disturbing crimes that hide in plain sight. Tonight's case will leave you questioning everything you think you know about love, trust, and betrayal. A groom standing at the altar, a bride with a secret, and a truth so explosive that it would end in tragedy on the very night they were joined together. Before we go deeper into this chilling story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications, so you never miss any of our true crime investigations. Trust me, what you are about to hear is unlike anything else, and you will not want to miss the twists that are coming. And as you watch, let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. We love seeing our Dark Motives community grow across the world, and your voice matters in every single case we cover. Now let's step back and uncover how this nightmare began, long before the wedding bells rang. Our story begins in Birmingham, Alabama, a city known for its rich history and strong ties to faith. Among the many churches that stood tall, one congregation was especially proud of a young pastor who seemed destined for greatness. His name was Michael Turner, and to many he embodied what a man of God should be. Charming, disciplined, and deeply respected, Michael carried himself with a quiet authority that drew people in. Every Sunday his voice echoed across the sanctuary, delivering sermons that moved hearts and kept pews full. Behind the pulpit he spoke of family, unity, and the sanctity of marriage. Yet away from the crowd, Michael longed for companionship. For years, whispers about his personal life followed him, members wondering when their beloved pastor would finally settle down. That moment seemed to arrive when he introduced the congregation to a woman named Clarissa. She was striking, with a gentle smile and a presence that turned heads. People admired her devotion, her willingness to serve, and how naturally she seemed to fit into Michael's world. The two of them quickly became the church's shining example of love and commitment. But beneath the picture-perfect smiles and public adoration, there was a secret. One that neither the congregation nor Michael himself truly understood. A secret waiting to surface on a night meant to be filled with intimacy and joy. Michael and Clarissa's courtship was fast. Almost too fast. Within months of meeting, the two were inseparable. Michael would invite her to Sunday services, proudly introducing her to church members as the woman who had finally captured his heart. For the first time in years, those who had once worried about his solitude now celebrated his joy. To outsiders, everything seemed perfect, yet to those paying closer attention, there were moments that raised quiet questions. Clarissa was warm and kind, but also guarded. She rarely spoke about her past, brushing off personal questions with vague answers. If someone asked where she grew up, she would smile and change the subject. When Michael's closest friends tried to get to know her, she kept conversations short, offering little more than polite laughter. It was enough to seem mysterious, but not enough to cause alarm. Still, there were whispers. In Birmingham's tight-knit community, secrets are hard to keep. A few people claimed they had seen Clarissa before, in places that did not align with the story she presented. Some said she had lived under a different name. Others believed she had left behind an entire life no one dared to mention. These were rumors without proof, easy to dismiss when Michael looked so happy. Michael himself noticed small oddities but brushed them aside. There were times Clarissa avoided certain topics, nights she seemed uncomfortable with the idea of intimacy, and moments when she grew anxious whenever marriage came up. He told himself it was nerves, that love meant patience, and that faith would guide them both. After all, he was a pastor, a man trusted to see the good in others. He convinced himself that whatever Clarissa carried, it was not enough to undo what they had built. But with every passing day, the pressure grew. The engagement came quickly. followed by wedding plans that felt rushed even to those who supported the union. It was as if Clarissa wanted everything finalized before questions could catch up to her. And Michael, blinded by love and the excitement of finally having a partner, ignored the unease lingering in the background. What no one realized then was that this hurried path was leading them straight into tragedy. The morning of the wedding in Birmingham was filled with joy. The church bells rang, guests arrived in their finest clothes, and the sanctuary was decorated with flowers that seemed to glow under the soft light. For Michael, this was the culmination of years of waiting. He stood tall in his crisp suit, his Bible clutched in his hand, smiling as members of the congregation shook his hand and congratulated him. Clarissa entered the church with grace, her white gown flowing as if she had stepped out of a dream. Gasps filled the room when she appeared at the back of the aisle, every eye drawn to her presence. The choir hummed softly, the air thick with reverence and excitement. Michael's eyes glistened, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and love. In that moment, all doubt seemed to disappear. To him, this was the woman God had chosen for him. The ceremony unfolded flawlessly. The vows were exchanged with trembling voices. Tears welled in the eyes of family and friends, and the pastor leading the service declared them husband and wife. Applause filled the sanctuary as Michael and Clarissa sealed their union with a kiss. For the congregation, this was a day of celebration, a triumph of faith and love. For Michael, it felt like a new chapter had finally begun. But as the celebration carried on, subtle cracks appeared. Clarissa seemed uneasy, her smile forced at times, her laughter hollow when guests approached. A bridesmaid noticed her hands trembling as she held her bouquet. Michael, too absorbed in the joy of the day, missed these signs, brushing off any unease as exhaustion or nerves. The reception was lively, filled with music, dancing, and endless congratulations. Yet even in the midst of joy, there was a shadow. Some of the older members of the congregation exchanged knowing glances, their whispers carrying a tone of suspicion rather than celebration. It was as if certain guests knew more than they were willing to say. But by the end of the night, as the couple prepared to leave for their first moments alone as husband and wife, no one could have predicted the horror waiting behind closed doors. When the reception ended, the couple left under a shower of rice and cheers. Guests waved as Michael and Clarissa drove away, the sound of laughter echoing behind them. To everyone outside, it was a perfect ending to a perfect day. But inside that car, silence lingered. Michael was smiling, excited for the night ahead, while Clarissa sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the passing streets of Birmingham. The hotel suite was elegant, prepared with champagne, roses, and soft music. Michael unlocked the door with a nervous grin, pulling his new bride close. He whispered words of love, promising a future filled with faith and happiness. Clarissa nodded, but her hands trembled as she set her bouquet aside. Something in her demeanor shifted, her once confident smile fading into uncertainty. As Michael moved closer, he noticed her unease. He asked if she was all right, but she simply forced a smile, whispering that everything was fine. The air between them grew heavy. Minutes felt like hours. The anticipation of intimacy clashed with a growing sense of tension neither could ignore. And then, the moment came. In the stillness of that hotel room, a truth emerged that shattered everything. Michael discovered that the woman he had just married was not who she claimed to be. The foundation of his marriage, his faith, and his reputation collapsed in an instant. Shock turned to disbelief, disbelief to anger, and anger into something far darker. Clarissa tried to explain, her voice breaking as she pleaded for understanding. She insisted that she loved him, that she never wanted to hurt him, that this secret was one she had feared would destroy everything. But for Michael, the revelation was too much. The man who had stood at the altar just hours before, the man who preached forgiveness every Sunday, now felt betrayed in the most intimate and unforgivable way. The air inside that hotel room grew suffocating. Michael paced the floor, his chest rising and falling as his mind spun out of control. Every word Clarissa spoke seemed to fuel his rage rather than calm it. She begged him to sit down, to listen, to see her as the person who had stood by his side. But Michael's ears were deaf to reason. His pride, his faith, and his image as a pastor burned in flames he could not extinguish. Clarissa reached out to touch his arm, hoping to calm him, but he pulled away violently. His voice rose, echoing through the walls, filled with fury and disbelief. He shouted about betrayal, about humiliation, about being deceived in front of his congregation and God himself. To him, this was not just a secret, it was a wound cut into the very core of his identity. In the chaos, Clarissa tried to move toward the door, but Michael blocked her path. His hands shook as his anger tipped into something irreversible. The silence between their cries was pierced by the sound of glass breaking, the champagne bottle toppling to the floor, its contents spilling like blood across the carpet. Moments later, the shouting stopped. Neighbors in the hallway reported hearing a single thud, then silence. When the noise died down, no one imagined the horror that had unfolded just beyond that door. Michael had crossed a line he could never return from. The wedding night, meant to mark the beginning of a shared life, had instead become the end of one. By the time the room fell quiet, Clarissa lay still. The veil, once a symbol of purity and hope, was now stained in tragedy. Michael stood over her, breathing heavily, his hands trembling, realizing what he had done. In one night, the pastor, the groom, the man celebrated by his community, had turned into a killer. When the room went silent, Michael stood frozen, his body trembling as though the reality had not yet sunk in. The woman he had called his wife only hours before now lay lifeless on the floor. The white gown, once pristine, was torn and stained, a cruel reminder of what the night was supposed to be. Michael pressed his hands to his head, pacing back and forth, his breath shallow and uneven. He whispered prayers under his breath, fragments of scripture colliding with the weight of his crime. The man who had preached forgiveness and grace could not find forgiveness for himself in that moment. His faith had been his anchor, but now, it felt like chains pulling him deeper into despair. Outside the hotel room, life carried on. Guests laughed in the lobby, music played faintly from a nearby ballroom, and no one suspected the darkness hidden behind the door of that honeymoon suite. Hours earlier, Michael had been celebrated, lifted high by his congregation as a symbol of purity and strength. Now, he stood over the evidence of his rage, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. In desperation, Michael tried to make sense of what had happened. He thought about running, about escaping the consequences that would surely follow, but the walls of the room seemed to close in, reminding him that there was no escape. His reputation, his ministry, his freedom, all of it had collapsed in the span of a single night. As dawn approached, the once joyful room lay in ruins. Shattered glass, overturned chairs, and the silence of death painted a picture of tragedy that no one could yet see. For Michael, the waiting hours before discovery were a torment, every tick of the clock dragging him closer to the moment when the world outside would finally know the truth. Morning light crept through the curtains of the hotel suite, casting a cruel brightness on the scene inside. By now, Michael had been pacing for hours, his mind unraveling, his body drained. When housekeeping knocked at the door to offer service, he froze. For a moment he thought about staying silent, but the weight of what had happened was too much to contain. The knock came again, firmer this time, followed by the jingle of keys. When the door finally opened, the maid's scream shattered the quiet hallway. She saw what no one should have seen: a bride sprawled lifeless on the floor and a groom standing above her with vacant eyes. The scream drew staff, then security, and within minutes the police were called. The suite, once prepared for love, was now sealed off as a crime scene. Officers found Michael in a daze, his clothes disheveled, his hands trembling. He did not resist when they placed him in handcuffs. Witnesses later recalled the eerie calm that came over him as he was led out of the hotel. It was as though the storm had passed, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who knew his life was finished. Word spread quickly across Birmingham. Congregation members who had celebrated the wedding only hours earlier were now waking up to headlines that defied belief. Their pastor, the man they trusted, had been arrested for the death of his own bride on the very night of their union. Shock turned to outrage, confusion, and sorrow as the community tried to understand how something so unthinkable could happen so close to home. Inside the police car, Michael remained silent, staring straight ahead. Reporters swarmed outside the station, cameras flashing as he was escorted inside. The man once seen as a leader of faith was now reduced to a figure of shame. His reputation destroyed, his freedom slipping away with each passing second. The trial that followed was one of the most talked about cases in Birmingham's history. Courtrooms filled with reporters, church members, and curious locals who wanted to witness the downfall of a man they once admired. The prosecution painted Michael as a man consumed by pride and anger, a groom who could not handle the truth and chose violence instead of compassion. They reminded the jury that Clarissa had trusted him with her secret, and he had answered that trust with blood. Michael's defense told a different story. They argued that he had been blindsided, humiliated, and betrayed, that his actions were not premeditated but fueled by an emotional storm he could not control. They pleaded for understanding, for mercy, insisting that the man in the pulpit was not the same man who stood in that hotel room on the night of the crime. Outside the courthouse, emotions ran high. Some members of Michael's congregation stood by him, saying he had been pushed beyond his breaking point, while others turned away in disgust, ashamed of ever placing their faith in him. For Clarissa, the reaction was mixed as well. Some mourned her as a victim who never got the chance to live freely, while others whispered cruel judgments about the secret she had kept. The case divided the community, pulling at the very fabric of the church. Inside the courtroom, Michael sat motionless as witness after witness testified. The housekeeping staff described the horrific scene, the police detailed his arrest, and medical experts explained the cause of death. Each word pushed him further into the reality of what he had done. He was no longer Pastor Michael Turner, the man of God, but an accused killer whose future lay in the hands of 12 strangers. As the trial stretched on, the tension only grew. The jury's decision would not just determine Michael's fate, but also send a message to a city torn apart by betrayal, faith, and tragedy. Every eye in Birmingham was fixed on the courtroom, waiting to hear the verdict that would close this chapter of horror. The jury deliberated for hours before returning with their decision. Guilty. Michael Turner, once a respected pastor and newlywed groom, was sentenced to life in prison. The church that once celebrated his union now carried the weight of shame, while Clarissa's name became a haunting reminder of the night love turned deadly. This case left more questions than answers. Could the truth have been handled differently? Was there ever a way for this story to end without tragedy? Or was the secret itself destined to explode the moment vows were spoken? These are the questions that still linger in Birmingham, questions that may never be fully answered. What is certain is that a community lost its faith in a man they once trusted, a woman lost her chance at life, and a love story became one of the darkest crimes in the city's history. Thank you for watching Dark Motives. If this story gripped you as much as it did us, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe justice was served? And tell us where in the world you are tuning in from. We love hearing from our community across the globe. Make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications on because more cases like this are coming. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the darkest motives often hide in plain sight.